So here we're going to look at the square root method to solve quadratic equations. So given g of x equals x squared, that's a quadratic function. Now it's also a polynomial of degree 2, but the name for those are quadratics. So we're going to find each of the following algebraically and graphically. So g of 2, remember that all that means is that 2 is your x value. So if you were to find g of 2, that's just 2 squared, which is 4. So that is the algebraic way. Graphically, when you look at the graph here, when x equals 2, the y value is up here at 4. And the next one, g of negative 2, same idea. You're going to put negative 2 into your function for the x value. And negative 2 squared is positive 4. Now people miss that all the time because they'll say negative 4. Whenever you substitute into a function, if you put parentheses around the number that you're substituting into, then you won't miss it. When x is negative 2 on the graph, we're up here at a y value of 4. So that's graphically how you solve that. So as we move along, now we're going to solve g of x equals 4. So now what x value or values can you put into your function to get a y value of 4? So we know that if x equals negative 2, if you do negative 2 squared, that'll give you 4. And x equals positive 2 squared will give you positive 4. And we essentially are just going backwards from that first question. So if we know that the answer was 4, or the y value was 4, the x values that gave us that were negative 2 and positive 2. So we get x equals positive or negative 2. Now graphically what you're looking at is y equals 4 is right here, and that happens at 2 points, right here and over here. So that's when x is negative 2 or positive 2. So to solve g of x equals 9, you're solving x squared equals 9. Well, what can you square to get 9? We know we can get positive 3 or negative 3. So right now, to solve that, we just have to kind of think in our head, what can you square to get 9? And again, that negative 3 is something that people will miss every single time. If you look at the graph, where does x squared equal 9? So where does our y value equal 9? That's way up here. And that happens at this point and this point, which happens to be negative 3 and positive 3 for the x values. So we get two different answers there. Okay, the next one, solve g of x equals negative 4. So we say, well, what number can you square to get negative 4? Well, there's no real solution there. And the reason for that is, what number can you multiply by itself to get negative 4? If you're thinking about negative 2, well, negative 2 squared is positive 4. Because remember, that means when you square something, it means you're going to multiply by itself. So if you do negative 2 times negative 2, that gives you positive 4, not negative 4. Graphically, what we notice is, where does the y value equal negative 4 is down here, and does our graph ever go through that y value? Negative 4 is down here. Our graph never goes through that. So that means there is no x value that will give you a solution. So again, what we say is no real solution. So the idea here is, how do we get to solve these x squared equations algebraically? Meaning showing our steps and showing our work. So what we need to do is notice how in our answer, just for x squared equals 9, we get x equals plus or minus 3. Well, you want to think about 3 squared is 9, and also negative 3 squared is 9. So to undo a squared, you square root. So to solve x squared equals a number, you do x equals plus or minus the square root of the number. So the one way that I would say to think about it is to undo a squared, you do plus or minus the square root. And again, that plus or minus is extremely important because that's what gives you the two different answers. If you just did the square root, it would only give you the positive answer. So if you solve a few of these algebraically, and we'll go through the rest of this fairly quickly, if x squared equals 36, well, we know that if you do negative 6 or positive 6 squared, that'll give you 36. So what I want to show algebraically, though, is show the step where you take the positive or negative square root of 36, and that'll give you plus or minus 6. Okay, same idea for x squared equals 100, so take a minute and do that. And then the last one, with x squared equals 6, notice on that one, when you try to do the square root of 6, you don't get a nice answer. So I'm going to show you something just real quick on the calculator. Believe it or not, the square root of 6 is the exact answer. But just suppose you went to your calculator and you said, all right, if we do the square root, so second x squared will be the square root of 6. Press enter, and whoop-de-doo, we get the square root of 6. If you press the arrow, the double arrow button down here, that'll turn your value into a decimal. So 2.44948. So this would depend on directions. Remember, the square root of 6 is your exact answer. Okay, plus or minus square root of 6. But if I said to round to the nearest tenth or the nearest hundredth, if I did the nearest hundredth, that's the second decimal place. So the 9 will round this 4 up to a 5. So x equals plus or minus 2.45. That would be to the nearest hundredth. Okay, if I don't tell you what to round to, then leave it in exact form. Okay, on the second page, there's just several more to try, and this is pretty much you trying these. Make sure that you isolate the x squared term first. So in number 3, part A, we have to add the 3 first. So x squared equals 1, and then you can go through and solve that. Okay, and again, I'm showing that step of doing plus or minus the square root of the number as an intermediate step. Okay, so make sure you show that. And then if you pause the video and try through part D, I'll put the answers up, and then we'll go on to the next part. And you'll notice that part D, that one, the exact form, is plus or minus square root of 12. Because I didn't tell you to round, so we'll leave it in that exact form. Okay, so moving on to the rest of these, we want to look at isolating the x squared term first, and then doing plus or minus the square root. So if you pause the video and try these, I will put the answers up, and then we'll be done. Okay, so there's the first few. Again, fairly straightforward. Just watch your signs. And then there's the next section through part F. A lot of students will miss part E. If you subtract 6 first on this one, you're left with a negative x squared. Well, remember, that's like negative 1 times x squared. So divide by negative 1, and that'll change that to positive x squared equals positive 16. And then you can square root it. The last few that people have a tough time with are when you have fractions. So if we look at x squared equals 4/9, if you do x equals plus or minus the square root of 4/9, you want to think about what did you multiply by itself to get 4 over 9? Well, remember, with a square root of a fraction, you square root the top and the bottom number. So what do you multiply by itself to get 4 is 2, and to get 9 is 3. So that is x equals plus or minus 2/3. Okay, and then very similar for part H and I. Again, don't put them in your calculator and get all these decimals. Okay, just work your way through it and think about it. So part H is positive or negative 7/2, and then part I is plus or minus 1/3. So that's how you use the square root method to solve quadratic equations.